And hello again from Fox News in Washington. Donald Trump's first week in office is ending in controversy and widespread protest. Federal judges have now stepped in to temporarily block part of Mr. Trump's ban on people coming to the U.S. from certain largely Muslim nations. Some of the travelers caught in the ban were about to be deported back to their home countries. In a moment, we'll have a Sunday exclusive when we sit down with Counselor to the President, Kellyanne Conway. But first, let's bring in Fox News correspondent Rich Edson reporting from the White House on a president who's charging full speed ahead. Rich.
Good morning, Chris. And the Trump White House is defending its executive order halting immigration from several predominantly Muslim countries. This, as a judge, has blocked the deportation of those detained at airports as a result of that order. The ruling falls short of letting those immigrants into the country. And in response to the ruling, the Department of Homeland Security says in a statement, quote, "The president's executive order remains in place. Prohibited travel will remain prohibited, and the U.S. government retains its right to revoke visas at any time if required for national security or public safety." And at the White House, President Trump is responding to that criticism.
It's not a Muslim ban, but we were totally prepared. It's working out very nicely. You see it at the airports. You see it all over. It's working out very nicely. And we're going to have a very, very strict ban, and we're going to have extreme vetting, which we should have had in this country for many years.
And the president has also just tweeted, "Our country needs strong borders and extreme vetting now. Look what is happening all over Europe and indeed the world. A horrible mess." The president also continues conversations with foreign leaders. He's already spoken to Russian President Vladimir Putin. The White House says the two discuss, quote, topics from mutual cooperation in defeating ISIS to efforts in working together to achieve more peace throughout the world, including Syria. He's also scheduled to speak with foreign leaders from the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and South Korea. And as week 2 of the Trump White House begins, we also expect to hear who President Trump will choose to fill the Supreme Court vacancy. That's expected Thursday. Chris.
Rich Edson reporting from the White House. Rich, thanks for that. To discuss what the president's done and where he's headed, we're joined now by Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the president. Kellyanne, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Thank you, Chris.
So we just heard President Trump say it's all working out very nicely. But in fact, as we've seen, there are protests across the country, and now federal judges have stepped in to at least temporarily block deportation of people who had come in who are banned from coming in under his order. Shouldn't that have been worked out before this order went into effect?
The judge in Brooklyn, the Obama appointee judge in Brooklyn's stay of order really doesn't affect the executive order at all, because the executive order is meant to be prospective. It's preventing, not detaining. And so you're talking about 325,000 people from overseas came into this country just yesterday through our airports. It's 325,000. You're talking about 300 and some who have been detained or are prevented from gaining access to an aircraft in their home countries and must stay for now. That's 1%. And I think in terms of the upside being greater protection of our borders, of our people, it's a small price to pay. I am told by the officials that anyone has been detained, if there's no further threat, if they're not dangerous to this country, they can expect to be released in due course, as most of them have already.
So the ones that are here will be allowed, if they're vetted, to stay.
You're talking about the people who came on aircraft?
Yes.
Yes, if they're vetted. It's a routine screening process that they'll go through. If they are not dangerous, if they're not a threat, then they will be disposed of in a case-by-case. Their situations will be handled on a case-by-case basis. I was stopped many times, weren't you? After 9/11, I didn't resemble or share a name with or be part of any kind of terrorist conspiracy, but this is what we do to keep a nation safe. I mean, this whole idea that they're being separated and ripped from their families, it's temporary, and it's just circumstantial in terms of whether you were one of those 300 and some who was already on an aircraft or trying to get on an aircraft, as opposed to the over 3,000 children who will be forevermore separated from the parents who perished on 9/11.
President Trump says if we let refugees in, the Christians will be given priority. Here he is.
If you were a Muslim, you could come in. But if you were a Christian, it was almost impossible. I thought it was very, very unfair. So we are going to help them.
First, That's not true. I want you to take a look at this. As you can see here, in 2016, almost as many Christian refugees were admitted as Muslims. And second, President Trump is barring people from 7 countries, the ones you can see on the map, but not included on the list are Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Afghanistan and Pakistan. And Saudi Arabia is where most of the 9/11 hijackers came from. Why are they not on the list?
This list of 7 countries was offered by President Obama and his administration. In 2015,
well, that's never
Chris,
stopped you before.
Well, but hold on. In 2015, Chris, Congress passed the Terrorist Prevention Act. And what it essentially did is it identified the 7 countries, an expanded list from 4, and identifying them as a threat. These are countries that have a history of training, harboring, exporting terrorists. And one thing that's very important to recognize, that whether you're the Orlando shooter, yes, he was born here, but went abroad, was radicalized on the internet. If you're San Bernardino, if you are the Sarnoff brothers in Boston, these are people who traveled abroad, were radicalized, were trained, and then came back and did their bloodletting, their massacre here on American soil. It's no different really than what happened all across Europe. And so we can't just keep on looking the other way and pretending that there aren't people out there. There isn't a terrorist organization, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, otherwise,
no, but
who wants to...
Kellyanne, the specific question I'm asking you is Saudi Arabia, for instance, that's where the 9/11 hijackers, most of them came from. Why not block them?
Congress and President Obama's administration came up with this list of 7. Right, came up with a list of 7. We're following on that in week 1. This president will certainly keep identifying threats and risks. And look, Chris, people can't have it both ways with President Trump. They can't say on the one hand, well, he's not taking these briefings seriously, when he is. He has a presidential daily briefing. He is privy to information that the rest of us aren't, particularly the media. The political media aren't national security intelligence experts receiving briefings every single day like our president is. A president will always have information. Congress will always have information. The rest of us do not. And let me make very clear, these 7 countries, what about the 46 majority Muslim countries that are not included? Right there, it totally undercuts this nonsense that this is a Muslim ban. This is a ban on travel, prospective travel from countries trying to prevent terrorists in this country, from countries that have a recent history of training and exporting and harboring terrorists.
The president also got into a rift this week with Mexico after he signed an order calling for construction of a wall and insisted that Mexico was going to pay for it. We got this response from Mexican President Peña Nieto. Here he is.
Mexico does not believe in walls. I've said time and time again, Mexico will not pay for any wall.
And then Peña Nieto, I don't have to tell you, canceled his visit this week.
That was mutual. The president suggested it first on Twitter at about 9:24 a.m. that day on Thursday.
Well,
so it was mutual cancellation.
It's not a good thing, is it, that one of our closest allies, our immediate neighbor to the south, and they had a meeting scheduled for Tuesday? You think that's a good thing?
It's a great thing that they spoke for an hour.
Well,
after that,
having the state visit.
I'll tell you what's not a great thing. Here's not a great thing. It's not great that we have a $60 billion trade deficit with Mexico. It's not great that they allow, because there is no border, there is no respect of our sovereignty in this country, Chris. They allow people and drugs to just flow over that border.
Well, you know what? Kellyanne, that is an overstatement to say that we have no border and that there is no respect for our sovereignty. Is it an overstatement?
Well, is it an overstatement to say that there are not illegal immigrants, people and drugs flying over the border?
No, that's certainly true.
You know who I want Fox News to go interview? Go interview all those parents who have lost children to opiate use, and all those family members, not even children. It's a scourge in our society. And the idea that we just allow drugs to flow over our border and we look the other way, it stops with President Trump. He ran on this. It's been a centerpiece. He signed executive orders this week to do a couple of things, to start construction of that wall. It's a physical wall. But he also, in that executive order, Chris, he has expanded the resources and tools that he will give our brave men and women in law enforcement and our border agents. They simply can't do their jobs. You have to expand the physical space for detaining
but
and stop this nonsense.
You're answering the question I'm not asking. The question is about trying to work out a relationship with Mexico that doesn't so offend the Mexican president that he has to cancel a meeting, and where relations with the U.S. become a matter of national honor. And I want to raise the issue of a possible trade war, which is now being raised between Mexico and the U.S. And I want to put up the practical implications of that. Mexico is our 3rd largest trading partner. If we slap a border tax on their imports, and 20% is a number that's been mentioned by people in the White House, U.S. consumers will have to pay more for such things as cars and fresh food, and 6 million U.S. jobs that depend on trade with Mexico will be hurt if they tax our exports to them. In addition, Kellyanne, if Mexico goes into a recession, then we're going to have even more illegal immigration. Has that all been thought through?
Well, we're not going to have illegal. They may try, but they're not going to get here the way they've just been pouring over the borders in the past because of President Trump. But what you're saying about the 20% tariff, that's one possible option, as we have said as an administration. That's one possible option in terms of funding the wall. But let me go back to the major point about our relationship with Mexico. It was candidate Trump who accepted the invitation.
Please, I'm asking you a question about a possible trade war. Isn't that a dangerous thing if we're slapping taxes on their imports and they're slapping taxes on our imports? And doesn't that destabilize Mexico both politically and economically? I'm not saying that we shouldn't build a wall and we shouldn't protect our border. I'm just saying there's a good way of working it out and a bad way of working it out.
There's a fundamental fairness that Donald Trump ran on, won on, and will execute as president of the United States. You saw it already this week, whether he's meeting with manufacturing CEOs, laborers, he's doing the Dakota and Keystone pipelines, and he's telling Mexico that this trade imbalance stops. You know, this idea that we're always worried about the other country, we're always worried about its citizens. This president says America first. 65% of them in a poll this week said...
If consumers have to pay more, it's going to affect this country. If we lose some of the 6 million jobs, it's going to affect this country. If they have a recession and more illegal immigrants come in, it's going to affect this country.
None of us want that. We want a strong, vibrant, prosperous Mexico. There's no question. That's why the two presidents spoke by phone this week. But remember, this whole nonsense that Donald Trump as president does not want a good relationship with Mexico, he's the one of the two candidates who accepted the invitation of this Mexican president to go to Mexico during the campaign.
And now the visit's been canceled.
And he did that. No, they talked by phone. There are many different ways for leaders to get work done. I mean, look at how many foreign leaders President Trump talked to just this weekend. It's a dizzying number. Russia and France and Australia, and certainly we had Prime Minister May here. But they will continue to talk. But Chris, the other statistic people have to realize is the number one source of revenue going into Mexico are Mexicans in the U.S. sending money back to Mexico. I mean, people feel like things are just unfair here. This man, as president, will do what he promised all along. He will put America first. That includes its workers, its safety, its people, its interests, and its allies.
I want to move to a couple of other issues while we have the time. President Trump says that he will announce his Supreme Court nominee this week.
Yes.
Can you guarantee that his nominee will favor overturning Roe v. Wade?
I can guarantee you that the promise that candidate Trump made will continue as president, that he's a pro-life president, and he assumes that he will, well, he has promised that he will appoint pro-life judges, including to the Supreme Court. Here's the thing about the Supreme Court battle we're about to face. If past his prologue, the way the Democrats in the Senate have treated our cabinet nominees does not bode well for filling that vacancy left by Antonin Scalia. It's just been terrible the way they tried to humiliate and embarrass our cabinet nominees. We still don't have a Secretary of Commerce, a Secretary of Treasury. What are we doing over there?
I am going to go bring that up with Dick Durbin in the next segment, so I promise you. But I want to press on this. You spoke at the March for Life rally on Friday, and you said this. This is a time of incredible promise for the pro-life movement. But I don't have to tell you, they don't want promise. They want Roe versus Wade overturned. Will the president nominate someone committed to doing that? Yes or no?
That will come up in the person's hearings. I mean, of course, they'll be obsessively asked that question, not so much about the Commerce Clause or about extraterritoriality, but they'll be asked about Roe versus Wade obsessively. Let me tell you about the action.
No, but can you tell
Mexico
us that
City policy
for those hundreds of thousands of people who were out there on the mall who you said, this president hears you, is he going to appoint somebody who wants to overturn Roe v. Wade?
He's going to appoint somebody who respects the Constitution. And I haven't heard the word penumbra since 1973. Have you? In other words, we've got this...
No, it's a good word, but no, I haven't heard it since.
It's a word that you haven't heard because nobody dare use that word.
Out, that was the explanation for how Roe v. Wade got...
Not just the explanation, it's a Supreme Court decision on how we allowed... But look what's happened since. We've had millions of innocent babies taken from their mothers. We are having this culture of life now that does not respect life from conception to natural death. And this president gave this Manhattan male billionaire who was pro-choice most of his adult life gave the most impassioned defense of life that any of us had ever heard coming from a presidential podium.
Okay.
Said to Hillary Clinton, you and your ilk are really extreme on this issue. You're for partial birth, you're for sex selection abortions, which basically extinguishes the next generation of girls, not boys. You're for taxpayer funding abortion.
I don't mean to interrupt, but
well, that's what's on the table here.
We're running out of time, and I want to ask you about one other issue, and that is the president's relationship with the press. Here is what he had to say about that this week.
The media, much of the media, not all of it, is very, very dishonest. Honestly, it's fake news. It's fake. They make things up.
And Chief Strategist Steve Bannon went much further. Quote, the media should be embarrassed and humiliated and keep its mouth shut and just listen for a while. But Bannon wasn't finished. The media has zero integrity, zero intelligence, and no hard work. You're the opposition party, not the Democratic Party. You're the opposition party. Kellyanne, do you understand how offensive that is?
I understand how offensive it was to never be taken seriously that Donald Trump could be elected president. On great days, we were ignored. On most days, we were mocked.
A lot of us reported on it fairly, and that's a different issue.
No, it is the issue because it extends into this presidency, Chris. You can't put a piece of tissue paper between the way Donald Trump was covered as the Republican candidate, the Republican nominee, the president-elect, and the president. It's all the same. It is an anti-Trump screed. It is completely disrespectful to the office of the president. Why? Look at what happened this week. Nobody's interested in learning the policies. It's just
I've been asking you about policies today. I asked you about the vetting. I asked you about Mexico.
Yes, and
I asked you about the Supreme Court. All of those are legitimate questions.
Yes, not every network and every print outlet is created equally in this. But if you read people's Twitter feeds, that crap would never pass editorial muster in a newspaper or on your TV show on your network here, nor should it. And so the idea that tweets are my own, really at 10:45 a.m. while you're walking out of the place where you work,
all I would say is,
tweets are not your own.
Much to the dismay of some of the people here at Fox, I don't tweet.
Look, let
me get to, if I may, to the real point. Politicians complain about bad press. I think you have some legitimate complaints about bad press. The First Amendment protects the press. We are in the Constitution, and it is offensive, quite frankly, to have folks, any politician, but folks who have been in the White House for a week lecture us about what we should and shouldn't do and that we should keep our mouths shut.
Well, no, I think what my colleague Steve Bannon is saying is, why don't you talk less and go listen to America more? Because let me tell you something. I know what he meant. I work with him every day. The media failed to learn America. Donald Trump proved something that the media failed to do, which is he understood America. The idea that we were never taken seriously in places like Pennsylvania
to say we have zero intelligence, zero integrity, and that we should keep our mouths shut is offensive.
I think it's called listen more. And let me just say something that else happens. It's the way that everything is cherry-picked. Biased media coverage is easy to detect. It frankly helped us because this was such an elite rejection election where the establishment, the elites were all rejected by the voters. It turns out there are a heck of a lot more of them than us, Chris, and that's how we won. Why is that relevant? It's relevant because people, who's cleaning house? Which one is going to be the first network to get rid of these people who said things that just weren't true? Talk about fake news. Talk about alternative facts. What happened last week? I went on 3 network Sunday shows. I spoke for 35 minutes on 3 network Sunday shows. You know what got picked? The fact that I said alternative facts, not the fact that I ripped a new one to some of those hosts for never covering the facts that matter to America's women, the 16.1 million women in poverty as we sit here, the 12.4 million women who have no health insurance. Everybody should feel outraged. The billions of dollars we have spent as a nation on public education, only to have millions of kids trapped in schools that fail them and never really promote and protect their intelligence and prepare them for the world as they all deserve. They shouldn't be restricted by the zip code where they live. They should be lifted up. This has all been a colossal failure, and nobody wants to talk about that. They want to talk about, it's always zing, it's always playing gotcha. There's no question that when you look at the contributions made by the media, money contributions, they went to Hillary Clinton. We have all the headlines. People should feel embarrassed. Not one network person has been let go. Not one silly political analyst and pundit who talked smack all day long about Donald Trump has been let go. They're on panels every Sunday. They're on cable news every day. Who's the first editorial writer? Where's the first blogger that will be let go that embarrassed his or her outlets? We know all their names. I'm too polite to call them out by name, but they know who they are, and they're all wondering why I'd be the first to go. The election was 3 months ago. None of them have been let go. If this were a real business, if the mainstream media were a thriving private sector business that actually turned a profit, which is not true of many of our newspapers, Chris, 20% of the people would be gone. They failed to protect their shareholders and their board members and their colleagues. And yet we deal with them every single day. We turn the other cheek. If you're part of Team Trump, you walk around with these gaping, seeping wounds every single day. And that's fine. I believe in a full and fair press. I'm here every Sunday morning. I haven't slept in months. I believe in a full and fair press. But with a free press comes responsibility. And the responsibility is to get the story right. Biased coverage, easy to detect. Incomplete coverage, impossible to detect. That's my major grievance, is that the media they're not giving us complete coverage. President Trump has signed all these executive orders this week. He's met with these heads of state. He's done so many things to stimulate the economy, to boost wages, to create jobs. Where's the coverage?
Kellyanne, we're going to have to leave it there.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
And let me say, you didn't rip me a new one.
Not at all.
Thank you.
I talk like a Jersey girl sometimes.
Thank you very much. Up next, more on the fallout from President Trump's executive order on immigration. We'll get reaction from the Senate's #2 Democrat, Dick Durbin, when we come right back. Joining me now from Chicago is Dick Durbin, the Senate's #2 Democrat. Senator Durbin, let's start with the uproar over President Trump's executive order sharply limiting the number of people from largely Muslim countries who can come in. Here is what the president had to say this week.
I'm establishing new vetting measures to keep radical Islamic terrorists out of the United States of America. We don't want them here.
Senator, your reaction to the federal judges stepping in and stopping any possible deportation, and your reaction also to what you just heard from Kellyanne Conway.
Well, thank goodness that this Brooklyn federal judge has tried to stop these executive orders. Here are three things that are wrong. First, it was an impulsive move by the president without follow-through to the Department of Homeland Security. When we contacted Customs and Border Protection at the airports, they said, they just sprung this on us, and now we're detaining people, some of whom are legal permanent residents. So they didn't have clear guidance from the administration about how to make this work. Number two, going after these refugees, these are the most carefully vetted visitors to the United States of anyone who comes through our airports, including this ban on Syrian refugees, when we have had no examples, none, not one, of a Syrian refugee engaged in terrorism in the United States. And the third point, and I think this is one that is going to haunt us for a long time, was the suggestion by the president that somehow we're going to favor Christians and in some cases banning Muslims in the future. That is exactly the opposite message we need to send to our allies and to those who frankly want to do us harm around the world.
But, Senator, the president points, and there's no question, as Kellyanne Conway pointed out, there have been some mess-ups this weekend. But on the larger issue of what he's doing, the president points out that there are Islamic radicals, some of them refugees, who have committed terror acts in Europe. There was at least one person who came in on a visa program who was involved in the terror attack in Bernardino. He says, I'm the one protecting the country.
I can tell you that I can't stand up for any European standard when it comes to refugees. I can when it comes to the United States. They go through vetting of a year or two. We had one Syrian refugee family that is in Turkey in a refugee camp waiting 4 or 5 years to come to the United States, and because of President Trump's executive order, they've been stopped. These are carefully vetted. If you meet these people, Chris, you realize why we do this.
So what's going on here? These people are so carefully vetted. What's going on here, Senator?
Well, you ask me what's going on in Europe? I can't tell you.
No, what's going on here in the United States with the order by President Trump?
Well, I can tell you what's going on here is that he has established a target of refugees, and I don't think that is our vulnerability. If you want to make America safe, the refugee program is the most carefully vetted program in our government. Think of the thousands who come in on visa waivers each day at airports all around the United States. Think of so many others come in the United States. Serious questions need to be answered. But when it comes to refugees, these children who are coming from war-torn zones, we're going to stop them from coming to this country. What does it say about us? And what does it say about our vigilance when it comes to keeping this country safe when we target children?
I want to take you back, switch subjects and take you back to a moment in the White House this week when President Trump met with union leaders, and Doug McCarran, who's the president of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters, said this.
The address on Friday was a great middle-class address. I mean, it hit home for the people that have been hurting. That was a great moment for working men and women of the United States.
Thank you.
Now, Senator McCarran endorsed Hillary Clinton during the campaign, but he now says, and a lot of those other union bosses say, it's President Trump, not the Democrats, who are looking out for workers.
I can tell you this, the pipeline decision was popular with the building trades, and Doug McCarran reflected that popularity. President Obama knew it when he went the other way, that they would be unhappy with him. But I will tell you this as well, in the long haul, when it comes to the organizing rights of unions, when it comes to the wages paid to union members, when it comes to collective bargaining, it'll be the Democratic Party that'll be fighting for Supreme Court justices and federal judges who recognize that. Traditionally, that's where we've been, and the Republican Party on the other side.
We are now 9 days into this presidency. At the equivalent point back in 2009, 12 of President Obama's nominees had been confirmed. At this point, only 4 of President Trump's nominees have been confirmed. Isn't this just obstruction by the Democrats?
Definitely not. And the reason is this. 8 years ago, when Obama came up with his nominees for the cabinet, by January the 8th, before January 20th swearing in, these nominees had filed the ethics statements they were required to file. In this case, with the Trump nominees, even up to the day of the hearing, many of our committees were not receiving the required legal documents from these nominees. Second, among these nominees are many billionaires and people with extensive financial holdings. When Penny Pritzker was nominated for Secretary of Commerce under President Obama, it took 6 months to clear all of the ethical standards that had to be met and filings met before she could be considered. So here come the Trump nominees saying, well, we may have a lot of money and a lot of unanswered questions, but we want to be pushed forward in the front of the line.
But Senator,
we have an obligation to make sure they answer all the legally required questions.
I'll give you that there are some controversial nominees who may need more scrutiny, but let's look at some of the mainstream nominees who would seem pretty uncontroversial. Elaine Chao, she has already been confirmed for a job before. She's the wife of Senator Mitch McConnell. Ben Carson, Wilbur Ross, Rex Tillerson, Jeff Sessions, who's been a colleague of yours in the Senate for a long time. Isn't the president entitled to have his mainstream, non-controversial picks confirmed quickly?
You may be surprised to know, Chris, that when it comes to some of these nominees, Senator McConnell has held back calling them. We're ready to call them. You've mentioned a few. I'll say this. I've said from the beginning, I'm voting for Elaine Chao. I've known her for years. We disagree politically, but she's a good person for the job as Secretary of Transportation.
So why isn't she confirmed
and others
already?
On your list? Well, you might ask Senator McConnell that question. We've been ready to take her name up for some time. Rex Tillerson is up this week. Now, when it comes to Senator Sessions, he's going to be heard before the Judiciary Committee this week in the normal course of events like other nominees for Attorney General. And can I add that when Loretta Lynch went through the nomination process, after her hearing, Senator Sessions sent her an additional 22 questions, and then she was held on the Senate calendar for 2 months before a vote was actually taken.
Okay.
So we're doing our job and we're doing due diligence.
Let's go to one final issue, because you're going to have another nominee that you're going to have to consider this week, and that is President Trump's Supreme Court nominee. Now, there has only been one nomination for the Supreme Court that has ever been filibustered in the history of this nation, Abe Fortas back in the 1960s. Are you prepared to rule out a Democratic filibuster of this nominee?
Let me just say, I'm not going to jump ahead and tell you how I'm going to treat any nominee until I know who they are, what they stand for. What we've said is that if you'll bring us a moderate nominee, and I've told the White House this directly,
wait.
That is not too extreme on the right or the left, you won't run into controversy.
Not all of Barack Obama's choices were moderate nominees. You know, there were some pretty liberal nominees there. I mean, he won. He's allowed to have people of his philosophical stripe.
Chris, let me tell you, there's a different world there. When I listened to your lead-in and Mitch McConnell said, we just want to be treated the way we treated Obama nominees, does he think we have amnesia that he refused for the first time in the history of the Senate to meet with or have a hearing or vote on a Supreme Court nominee? We're going to treat this nominee fairly, but we need to know who he or she is, what they stand for, and believe that they're in the mainstream of thinking when it comes to American political thought.
Senator Durbin, thank you. thanks for talking with us today. Please come back, sir.
Thanks a lot.
Up next, we'll bring in our Sunday group to discuss President Trump's extreme vetting plan and that phone call with Russian President Putin.
The world is a mess. The world is as angry as it gets. Well, you think this is going to cause a little more anger? The world is an angry place.
President Trump defending his plan for what he calls extreme vetting of some people trying to come to the U.S. And it's time now for our Sunday group. GOP strategist Karl Rove, Charles Lane of the Washington Post, Julie Pace, who covers the White House for the Associated Press, and Dana Perino, co-host of The Five. Well, Karl, let's start with you. What do you make of the president's order restricting people coming to this country from largely Muslim nations and the federal judges, a couple of federal judges getting involved?
Well, look, he promises during the campaign extreme vetting. But I think people might have been surprised. I think that they might have been led to believe that rather than suspending the issuance of new visas, they didn't expect him to turn back people who already had visas, including people who had green cards. And that's how the federal judges got involved.
No, we should explain that. So you got a green card. You're a permanent resident in this country, legal resident in this country. You've gone on a trip someplace else. Now you can't get back in.
Or you have received a visa approved by the United States government in the recent past, and you got on an airplane and showed up at the airport, and suddenly that visa, which had been given to you by the United States government, is no longer legitimate and valid.
Donald Trump would say, too bad.
Not too bad. Well, but a federal judge said you could cause irreparable harm. In fact, one of the first people who had such a visa who was stopped at the New York airport, as luck would have it, is somebody who worked for the U.S. government in Iraq for the last 10 years. Not exactly, if you want to have a long, happy life, a good thing to do in Iraq. So, look, the president's following through on his commitment, but it strikes me that it might have been better. He wants the Secretary of the Homeland Security and the Secretary of State in the next 30 days to come up with the information that they need, and those two plus the Director of National Intelligence and the FBI Director in the next 60 days to come up with a plan for extreme vetting. It might have been better to say suspend the issuance of any new visas, rigorously monitor people who come into the country from these 7 countries who have a visa or permanent residents who come back in the country, and then in 90 days we have a complete new plan that we could then begin issuing new visas.
Chuck, as we say, this is already in the courts, and at this point, I guess you got something like 300 people who are in kind of limbo at U.S. airports. What's the fallout both politically and legally here?
Whatever it is, it's entirely self-inflicted. This was all avoidable for the White House. They put this thing together without a full interagency process. They put it together, obviously, without thinking through the green card angle and all its potential ramifications. And they produced an order that sort of is like a lose-lose-lose for them. It's not even the full Muslim ban he promised at one point. This is the sort of climb-down position, and yet he produces something that's over-inclusive in that it brings in all the green card people, and under-inclusive in that it leaves out, as you pointed out earlier, a number of countries such as Pakistan or Afghanistan from whence terrorists have come. So obviously there's huge uproar on the Democratic side. That was predictable. But very interestingly, I counted at least 3 Republican senators who voiced concerns about how this thing has worked out. So it's not even entirely clear that he's going to have unified Republican support behind this thing unless they can clean it up very quickly.
Dana, you worked for a president who famously and very in a concentrated way made the point, we're at war with terrorism, we're not at war with Muslims. Do you worry that this ends up changing that message?
Well, I do think it's important to point out that it's a moratorium, not a ban, so there is time for them to be able to figure it out, so it's not like it's a permanent thing. I also think that some of the responses today in the explanation, like from Kellyanne Conway earlier on your show, helped explain a little bit more about the decision-making process. And when they say that this was an Obama administration recommendation, I think that would have been a helpful thing to use initially. So I call that an ounce of prevention. How can you explain things more? Because what we found, and I think President Obama found it too, is that you can't get everyone to agree with a decision, but you should be able to get them to respect the decision-making process. And I think the Trump administration would be well served if it explains things a little bit more on the front end to avoid confusion on the back end, so that more of those stories that Kellyanne Conway was talking about, the underreporting of all the good stuff, could get more play.
You know, I'm beginning to call these Trump Sundays because I prepare the show on Saturday, and by Sunday morning, the world has changed. And what I thought we were going to talk about, and now what I'm going to talk about with you, Julie, is the president's phone call with Russian President Putin yesterday, which was highly anticipated, so much so that, in fact, President Trump had to lower expectations. Here he is.
Putin and Russia, I don't say good, bad, or indifferent. I don't know the gentleman. I hope we have a fantastic relationship. That's possible, and it's also possible that we won't. We will see what happens.
Julie, have you learned anything? Because the White House has not been very forthcoming, at least publicly. Have you learned anything privately from sources about how the call went? And two, this talk about conceivably lifting sanctions, which Kelly and Conway had said was under consideration.
You're right. The readout of this call was pretty brief. Not a lot of details in there.
We actually literally got more information from the Kremlin
than
we
often
did from
do.
The White House.
Kremlin is actually quite skilled at putting out readouts, not only that are more detailed, but also that come out faster than the White House. It's a strategy that they're pretty good at. I did talk to a White House official who said that sanctions did not come up in the course of this conversation. There was a lot of talk about security issues, particularly the idea of terrorism being what Putin apparently called a common foe multiple times in the course of this conversation. I think that you should look at this 30-day review that the president has ordered the Pentagon to do on the ISIS strategy for a possible focus on coordinating more with Russia and Syria, which is something that the Obama administration resisted. But even the idea that sanctions didn't come up in this phone call doesn't ease the anxiety that you're seeing, not just among European leaders, but a lot of Republicans on Capitol Hill who worry that the president, when he has to make a decision very quickly on the sanctions involving Ukraine, could look to make a deal with Russia and back off of those, and then also back off of the sanctions that Obama imposed for the hacking.
Dana, your former boss, Bush 43, famously said that he looked in the eyes, straight in the eyes of Vladimir Putin, got a sense of his soul. As we know, that didn't work out very well. How do you think this relationship do you think Trump can somehow charm or tame Vladimir Putin?
Well, I thought that Donald Trump's probably best moment of his week was his press conference with the UK Prime Minister Theresa May, where he talked about good, bad, or indifferent, I don't know, which is actually true. So he's not sure. He says he'd like to have a good relationship. So did the Obama administration with the famous reset button. I think
that didn't work out either.
No. So American presidents want to have good relations with countries all over the world. And then it's really up to that president or the counterpart to what their actions are. And I think the Ukraine issue, or whether there was more interference, and I think that also that Donald Trump will appreciate that Vladimir Putin has national interests of his own. He doesn't want to be friends with us because he's a friendly guy. He wants something from us, and it might be something nefarious that's not in our national interest, and so he might have to back off of it. But I think that his best moment of the week was with that moment when he answered the question in that press conference with Theresa May.
All right. We have to take a break here. When we come back, we'll discuss the upcoming showdown over the Supreme Court. Will Democrats use the filibuster to block President Trump's nominee? Plus, what would you like to ask the panel about the battle over confirming that new justice? Just go to Facebook or Twitter at Fox News Sunday, and we may use your question on the air.
Had a Supreme Court justice filibustered, but there's a chance that might happen.
Hey,
if that
whatever
happens, would you want Mitch McConnell to use the nuclear option?
Yes, I would.
President Trump telling Fox's Sean Hannity he's ready to pull out all the stops to get his Supreme Court nominee this week through the Senate. And we're back now with the panel. Well, Julie, there are three supposed frontrunners. Let's put them up on the screen. Three federal circuit court judges. Any sense as to the pecking order of those three, the likelihood, and as soon as Mr. Trump talked about the nuclear option, which would change the rules and mean the Senate would approve with only 51 votes instead of supermajority of 60 votes, Mitch McConnell immediately pushed back and said that's the Senate's call.
Right, absolutely. I think if you look at the pecking order of those three judges, we've seen Judge Pryor maybe fall a little bit to the bottom there. He's one that when you talk to...
Put the picture up on the screen if we can.
When you talk to Democrats and Republicans, he's one that they worry the most about. He has an extremely conservative track record, but he's been in the mix, certainly. A lot of people who've been talking to Trump from Heritage and the Federalist have been pushing Pryor. Neil Gorsuch seems to be rising at the moment. And we were talking about this a little bit in the green room. This is actually someone that I think that Democrats might have a harder time using the filibuster against. And so certainly because he is seen as certainly not a moderate choice, but if you look at his track record, he would be, I think, more acceptable to some people from red states than a Pryor even would. And politics comes into play enormously once you've made this pick. And I think given the atmosphere in Washington right now, the anger among Democrats about the way that Merrick Garland was treated, they are going to look to be really aggressive. And so anything that the Trump team can do to put someone in position to actually get approved by the Senate will help them out.
We asked you for questions for the panel, and we got a big response on this one. First of all, this on Twitter. What will happen if McConnell uses the nuclear option? Will there be a price? But on Facebook, Marilyn, speaking about what Julie was just saying, remembers Republicans blocking the nomination of Merrick Garland to the court last year. Dems should block any and all Trump appointees, just like McConnell did to Obama. Or is this different now? Carl, it seems like this is going to be an even bigger political fight than usual.
Yeah, well, it is different. For the last 80 years, no president of the United States has nominated in his final year and seen approved to the Supreme Court any nominee. It's not happened for 80 years. So it was to be expected that Barack Obama was going to be no different than all of his predecessors. In fact, Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer opposed the nomination. In Schumer's case, the approval of any Supreme Court nominee in the last year and a half of George W. Bush's term in office. It said so from the floor. Biden announced it as the Biden rule. No approval in the last year. So this is different. But will the Democrats try and obstruct? Absolutely. Is this going to be a bitter fight? Absolutely. At the end of the day, it comes down to two things. One is, are there enough red state Democrats to say, you know what, the person whom President Trump has nominated is acceptable enough to the people in my state that I'm going to pay a price if I turn into a blind obstructionist, like they're already making me on the nominees to the cabinet look like. And second of all is, if at the end of the day, are there sufficient number of them that they can keep in place the 60 rule? If not, I think Mitch McConnell, he is absolutely right to say this is the Senate's decision. But my sense is if Democrats harden the line and they get to 58 or 59, 52 Republicans and 6 or 7 Democrats, but not to 8, then they might impose the nuclear option. And
just to explain, it already is the case for lower court judges that because the Democrats changed the rules in 2013, you only need a simple majority of 51. The Supreme Court is still the supermajority of 60, so a filibuster can still block it. Now the question is, will the Republicans extend that or feel forced to extend that to a Republican nominee for the Supreme Court? I want to turn to another big subject, and I had a big conversation, as you saw in the first segment, the White House and the media. Here's what the president said this week. And Dana, as I discussed with Kellyanne Conway, Steve Bannon, in an interview with, interestingly enough, the New York Times, went a lot further. Keep our mouths shut, zero integrity, zero intelligence. Does this make sense from the White House's point of view?
Well, it does, because I think that they have effectively used the media against the Democrats, right? So they were able to say to their base, we have an enemy in the media, and the base agreed, and so it helps them a little bit. But I do think that, so Steve Bannon's quote, it's very quotable, and it's pretty, I can understand why a journalist would be offended by it. But the second part of it was, just give us a shot here. And I think what Kellyanne said about the underreporting of some of the good policies that they're doing or the problems that they're trying to solve. I mean, I've done media relations for a long time, and as a Republican, it would be very frustrating. But the thing is also this. Human beings are always going to try to eat dessert first. If you keep feeding them sugar, they're going to go with the sugar. So if you give them something to cover that is process-oriented or a tweet that seems a little off,
the size of the inaugural crowd or the 3 million people voted.
They'll always do that. So I sort of feel like if you can just serve the meat and potatoes, I guess you would call that message discipline, then you won't have so much of the sugar that is running, because everyone's on a sugar high.
And I think it's important to note, though, Kellyanne talked about us not wanting to cover policy. On Friday, The president signed this order on refugees. It took 2 hours for the White House to give us the order. Right. It took several more hours to get the list of countries from them that this would actually impact. And then it took another full day to get an actual briefing on the details. We are desperate to cover the policies that this president is implementing. The White House, though, is not helping us do that.
Let me bring Chuck into this. Politicians, as I've just said to Kellyanne, complain about bad press all the time. Is this different?
This is the President of the United States declaring the media, which, by the way, he's not precisely defining. He's, but we think we know who he's talking about, as the party of opposition. And the implication of that seems to be, well, I don't have to cooperate with them or work with them or respect them or treat them. But, it's in a democracy, the opposition is not the enemy. Okay? Even if you identify someone as the opposition, you sometimes work with them, you talk to them, you compromise with them, you attempt to match what you consider their bad faith with your good faith. And so what's astonishing about the rhetoric of Steve Bannon in all of this is when he's saying opposition, what he seems to mean is implacable enemy. And I think that is new. But I would just repeat that in a democracy, the opposition is not the enemy. So even if it were true that the media is their opposition, that would not be a reason to freeze them out and to greet them with complete hostility.
Julie, we've got less than a minute here. Do you notice any particular antagonism dealing with this White House? I mean, is it different than you've been around for a while in the front row of the White House? Is this different?
It's a little bit different, but I would say that under the Obama administration, they also looked at us with some disdain. They also thought that their coverage was unfair. I'm sure Carl and Dana thought that their coverage was unfair when they were in the White House.
Absolutely.
Every White House believes that. I think the difference here is that they don't distinguish sometimes between critical coverage and what it actually is fake news. As president, you are going to get a lot of critical coverage. That's not going to stop.
Thank you, panel. See you next time. When we come back, a final word on next week's Fox News Sunday. Look at downtown Houston, home of Super Bowl 51, which airs next Sunday on Fox. And Fox News Sunday will be taking our show on the road. We'll be broadcasting from NRG Stadium. There you see it as the New England Patriots take on the Atlanta Falcons. Check your listings for Fox News Sunday in your area and also on Fox News Channel. And that's it for today. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Fox News Sunday.